Well, one night, a robber broke into a home and heard a voice say, "Jesus is watching you," while he rummaged through the desk. And he replied, "Who said that?" And once again, he heard the same thing. "Jesus is watching you." The robber looked around the room only to see a parrot. And he asked the parrot what its name was. And the parrot replied, "Cornelius." And the robber said, "What kind of name is that? Who names a parrot that?" The parrot said, "The same person who named that Rottweiler behind you, Jesus." Power in a name. Well, this is our first in a message series in our fall book study on the book, How Then Shall We Live? 4 Simple Questions That Reveal the Beauty and Meaning of Our Lives by ordained minister, therapist, and writer Wayne Muller. And I just want you to know, there's lots of books out there, and I perused several books. And this author might not be someone that you know. But I read this book several years ago, and it was so profound to me because this book is gentle. This book is tender, and it's about our shared humanity. And I feel like right now in our world, we could use some tenderness. We could use some gentleness in the call to awaken. So that's who Wayne Muller is. He just invites us to awaken gently and compassionately. And I love the stories that he shares of our shared humanity. So the first part of the book, we explored in our book study this past Wednesday, so we'd love to have you join us, by the way, is Who Am I? Like the song, Who Am I? And that's quite the question, isn't it, on our spiritual journey. Because, as we look to identify who we are, we're looking to know what God is. And when we look to know what God is, the infinite is, whatever you want to call that infinite life energy, we're looking to find our identity. Because if we know who we are, we know the direction that's ours to take. So, what is in a name? Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet meet and fall in love in Shakespeare's tale of star-crossed lovers, and they're doomed from the very start as members of 2 warring families. And here, Juliet tells Romeo that a name is an artificial and meaningless convention, and that she loves the person who is called Montague, not the Montague name or the family that comes with it. Romeo, out of his passion for Juliet, rejects his family name and vows to deny his father and instead be baptized as Juliet's lover. This one short line encapsulates the central struggle and tragedy of the play, Romeo and Juliet. So a name in this scene determined who the person was and who they could love. It determined what they could have and express and be. And that's still happening today. When we think about who we are, and we must look at what we have named. But where do we look? We look at the roles we play, because if we think about what do we name? What do we name in our lives? We name ourselves out of the roles that we play, such as mom, dad, spouse, daughter, musician, engineer, caretaker, right? We can look at our personality type and name ourselves. I am on the Myers-Briggs or in numerology. Or we can say I'm an introvert, an extrovert, I'm shy, I'm open, I'm expressive, I'm friendly. We can look at our politics, and name ourselves. We can look at our religious beliefs, Christian, Buddhist, recovering Catholic, Baptist, as many say in unity. We look at our feelings about things and describe who we are. We name ourselves in that way. I am frustrated, I am angry, I am concerned, I am peaceful, I am content. We make our stories be how we name ourselves. I'm from this family, so this is my story and this is how I name myself. I was watching The View this week, and Meghan McCain came back and she said who she was from a family of politicians. You know, and they were interviewing someone who had grown up in a family of actors, and of course, that's who they were. We can name ourselves in that way. I failed at this, so I can never, and we have a story about it, or I succeeded here, and I have a story about that. I went to school to be this, so I am. Or we can define ourselves by a diagnosis, a degree that we have. I trusted once and got burned, and now I'm guarded. We make our judgments be how we name ourselves. I'm unworthy, I'm controlling, I'm distrusting, I'm unforgiving. And we can make what we have done name ourselves. A mistake that we've made, we can now be called a criminal because we immigrated, we're an immigrant, we're an addict. But is that who we truly are? How we name ourselves? And what are those names based upon? The external, not what we really are. But Wayne Muller says, the naming of who we are will set the course of our life, determine what we love, how we live, and what gifts we bring to the family of the earth. Just how we name ourselves. And I was reminded, and Wayne Muller talks about Siddhartha, who grew up in a palace and started to notice the suffering in the world. And so what he did was he did these very severe, austere practices of starving himself and, to try and figure out the source of what suffering was about. And at 9 years old, he decided to try a more gentle approach to finding the answers he was seeking. So he sat beneath the Bodhi tree and decided he was going to meditate until all was revealed to him about the nature of life. And as the morning star rose, it became clear to him the nature of life and death and joy and sorrow, and he was awakened. And his name became Awake. Moses was commissioned to lead the people out, the Israelites, out of slavery in Egypt, and he was afraid. And so God appeared to him in the form of a burning bush. And Moses said, "Who shall I say send me? Who sends you is I am that I am." And so Moses takes on that name and goes on to do what was his to do. Folks, that is the power of a name. So, how are you naming yourself? Wayne Muller says the names we give things is a reminder of the essence of what we have named. Our name not only reflects who we are, but it helps us define who we will become, how we will live. We become what we name. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world." And he didn't say, you need to do this, this, or this before you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. That within each of us, as Thomas Merton said, we all have a hidden wholeness that is the light of who we are. And are we naming ourselves that? Are we standing in that? And so our opportunity is to just take a moment to look at how are we naming ourselves and how are we naming our life experience. Are we naming ourselves whole and capable and magnificent? Are we naming our life experience hard, disruptive, fearful? How are we naming ourselves? You know, one of my favorite authors is Alan Cohen. He's got a great sense of humor, and he writes these great anecdotes. And I came across this story where he was living in a rental property with a roommate, and apparently the landlord was pretty intimidating to him. And every single time he had an interaction with this landlord, he would just shrink and just, be defensive and not be himself. And his roommate reflected it back to him, said, "Alan, what is the deal? You act so small, you act so strange when this landlord comes in your sphere." And Alan had "You're so right." And so he decided to claim his power and be with his fears, whatever this person represented for him, and be his authentic self. And he said in that moment he realized the difference between authenticity and authority. They come from the same root. That as he stood in his authentic self, he stood in his authority. He stood in his power. They said that Jesus spoke with authority because he stood in his I am. He stood and he named himself the I am. So, we've learned in unity that the power of the I am, when we put anything with our I am, that is a declaration of what we're naming. So, what are you putting with your I am? I am whole. I am strong. I am capable. I am worthy. I am deserving. Is that what you're naming? Oh, yeah. Very good. Yeah. So, folks, this might be a review to you. This might be something that I know this about my I am nature, but I think it's something to remind ourselves. How are we naming ourselves in the midst of this hidden wholeness that we are? How are we naming it? Are we calling it what it is? Are we living into what we're naming? Because that's really how we're living. We will become that which we name. And what are we naming? So this week, I invite you to just check in with what you're naming. As you look at your world, as you look at the news, what are you naming it? And if we keep, I know for me, like that whole statement of whatever I name, I become, that has been very powerful for me this week as I've been working with this message. Do I want to become what I'm naming? Well, then I better name things the way that I want to see them. I want to name myself what I want to become. So can we take this on this week? Yeah. As you look in the mirror, what are you naming? As you look at the news, what can we name that's different than the external flurry? Yeah. Let's take it on this week. And come back next week just in a clear knowing of what we're naming and who we truly are. So let's affirm together. Each name I use for myself inspires and calls forth my true nature so that I live freely and joyfully. Amen.